What is the tragedy of the commons? It's called the tragedy of the commons when people use shared resources for their own benefit, which leads to the depletion of the resources. If a group of people share something, it is called the commons. Thanks for joining Dynamic Earth Learning. Our content covers interesting earth science, conservation, and sustainability topics. Visit our website dynamicearthlearning.com for teacher resources, videos, and e-learning courses. Tragedy of the commons theory. The tragedy of the commons is a theory in economics. This is a way to think about things. It talks about how people tend to make their own decisions without thinking about how they might affect other people or the environment. This theory is often used to define how individuals use shared resources in the community or globally. William Forster Lloyd, a well-known British writer, came up with this idea in 1833. While the idea and the term tragedy of the commons has been around for a long time, they were first used by an American ecologist named Garrett Hardin in 1968. When Hardin wrote a scientific paper called The Tragedy of the Commons, he went into great detail about this idea. The tragedy of the commons can happen when a person focuses on their own needs instead of the needs of a group. The main thing Garrett Hardin was worried about was overpopulation and what it would do to the environment. Hardin used the example of sheep grazing on pasture land to show how the tragedy of the commons can happen. This is how he looked at how private landowners use their grazing fields and how communities can use their own grazing land together. In Hardin's opinion, private lands are less likely to become overgrazed because the owner takes good care of them. People who own land together can easily overgraze it because they want to get the most out of it. Each herder will only think about growing their herd and not about the land or other herders. This, in turn, will make the pasture look bad, which will lead to a tragedy. When people don't pay attention to the health of the environment, the common resources will be overused. This is especially true when the demand for the resource in question is greater than the supply. The theory of the tragedy of the commons comes into play when there is a shared environmental resource that can't be taken away, is limited, and is competing for it. There are public resources that can't be excluded from being used by people or groups of people. These are called non-excludable resources. Resources are said to be rivalrous if other people can't use them because of their use. When there is not enough of a resource, it is called scarce. How does the tragedy of the commons relate to sustainability? Ecologists use the term sustainability to describe how to use natural resources in a way that doesn't cause them to run out. Ecological sustainability is the preservation of soil, water, and other resources that are shared by everyone. Keeping the environment in balance is very important. Misuse and overuse of common resources. Hardin's book, The Tragedy of the Commons, shows how people can misuse resources that are shared by many people. This can lead to the question of how long things can last in a certain environment. There are a lot of problems with environmental sustainability because we don't use our natural resources properly. Most of the natural resources in the world are common because they can be found easily. In the world, people can go to the oceans and forests and lakes. They can also get the air, soil, and water. It's all about fixing, preventing, and mitigating environmental disasters when you use common resources like water and land. People, on the other hand, use these resources in different ways and don't think about the possible consequences. They often put their short-term needs ahead of the needs of the environment and other people, which can be bad for the environment and other people. It's a tragedy of the commons when people misuse and overuse natural resources, says Hardin. Environmental sustainability can be hurt when people use resources for their own benefit. Sustainability can only be achieved if common resources are properly used and cared for. Because of the tragedy of the commons, people should use natural resources with limits in order to avoid this. Tragedy of the commons examples. In order to understand global problems, you can use the idea of the tragedy of the commons. Most of the problems that people have with resources happen when they use logical reasoning instead of collective reasoning. Climate change. There has been a big change in weather and temperature over time. This is called climate change. This is an example of the tragedy of the commons. The global change in the climate is an example of this. Human activities have a big impact on the climate in a lot of ways. People are a factor in the production of greenhouse gases that make the air dirty. Because all humans have free access to air, it is a resource that everyone can use. Still, some businesses do things that make a lot of pollution in order to make money. People are more concerned about making money than they are about the effects of climate change. They often don't think about them. As more and more harmful gases are released into the air by businesses, the planet will get worse because of climate change. Overfishing. For a long time, people thought that the resources in the ocean could never run out. The development of technology has led to a huge rise in the number of people fishing in the world's oceans. In addition, the world's population keeps growing, which means there's more demand for food. This leads to overfishing because fishermen want to meet the high demand for fish and also make money at the same time. Overfishing will lead to the loss of ocean resources, which will cause the tragedy of the commons. Overfishing can lead to the death of valuable fish and other marine organisms, as well as damage to the ecosystems of the sea. Destruction of rainforests. This means that everyone on the planet benefits from the rainforests around the world. Rainforests provide oxygen and also maintain the climate. Illegal loggers have been cutting down rainforests for their own profit, which has led to less forest cover. The timber industry also impacts rainforests through the regular harvesting of trees. Deforestation is an example of the tragedy of the commons because the rate at which trees are cut is higher than regrowth. This will lead to the gradual destruction of the environment if too many rainforests are cut down. Solution to the tragedy of the commons. It can be hard to avoid the tragedy of the commons because people don't think about things together. Everyone only thinks about themselves when they use common things. Hardin came up with 2 ways to solve the problem of the tragedy of the commons. 1. Privatization of resources. Privatization is when someone or a group of people takes charge of resources that the general public doesn't use. These new owners will take care of these resources because they belong to them. 2. Resource regulation through government restriction. The government can put rules on how people can use some common resources. There should be a set amount of fish that each fishing vessel should take from the ocean. The tragedy of the commons can be avoided. Hardin's theory can be used when a resource that was once abundant is used by a few people for their own benefit. But the theory of the tragedy of the commons has come under fire over time. Elinor Ostrom, an American political economist, disagreed with Hardin's idea. She said that communities can manage their common resources well. According to Ostrom, people can work together to manage shared resources in a reasonable way. Thanks for joining us today. Consider following Dynamic Earth Learning for more earth science, conservation, and sustainability topics. And visit our website dynamicearthlearning.com for teacher resources, videos, and environmental e-learning courses.